This is Network Zero, and finally we have the first proper episode 1 of this Chronicles of Darkness podcast, which is a spin-off podcast to Darker Days Radio, and I guess then is a cousin to the World of Darkness podcast, which is Midnight Express. So I am, of course, joined by David.
Hello.
And I am joined by a long-suffering gamer in my team, Sam.
Hello.
And for this first show, it makes sense to look at what is now officially Chronicles of Darkness. So if people still don't quite understand what's going on, Chronicles of Darkness is the new brand name for what was New World of Darkness. What was World of Darkness before they brought back all the old stuff. So this means we're covering, in the show, we'll be covering games like Vampire the Requiem, Werewolf the Forsaken, Mage the Awakening, and all of the other side games which bolt onto the rule system that Chronicles of Darkness is. In particular, of course, we're now into an age where we have a second edition of some of those games. So that means that we will be looking at how the settings for certain games have evolved and maybe have distilled certain ideas and themes from the last, almost 10 years of publishing for some of those games. And then on the side, we'll also be looking at particular films and TV that can inspire us for our games. Because Darker Days has the whole thing with its secret frequency. So we will be having our Kirlian Camera segment. But before we get into that, what gaming or interesting things have people been up to? We'll start with David. What have you been up to, gaming-wise, or interesting stuff?
Quite a lot, actually. I'm running a China Me Able meets David Cronenberg Numenera campaign with my wife and 2 friends, which is full of body horror and intrigue. That's going really well. I've interviewed the design team for Cult Divinity Lost, a new edition of the somewhat infamous Scandinavian horror RPG. I've done that for Twisted Tales, and I'm very much looking forward to running that at some point. I backed the Delta Green Kickstarter and expect to start receiving books for that fairly soon. And also in wargaming sense, because I know you are a keen War Machine player, Chris, I've recently started playing competitively and won 2 out of my 3 games in my first tournament. So there's still a horror connection as I play Cricks, which are, as you know, mechanical undead monstrosities.
Yes, Cricks are very, very cool. Which caster are you running for your army?
Asphyxius the Hellbringer. I have been playing Gorshade, Lord of Ruin, but he's just stayed in the bag for the entire day.
Okay, cool.
Well, let's see.
Let's do mine, because mine's fairly simple. So I've been playing in a Journeyman League for War Machine Hordes, running my Scorn army. So that's Morgul, who, if anyone doesn't really know about War Machine or Hordes, where Cricks are a bunch of undead gits, Scorn are a bunch of pseudo-Persian samurai tormentors, torturers, but they're not really evil. They're just evil from a certain point of view, which happens to be if you're human and not one of them. And so that's gone really well. I think I've played 7 games, won 4, and of course you get points for painted stuff, so I'm doing quite well on that. Been running a few Pharaoh in that army, which has been funny. And of course, as you play each week, or every so often, the armies get a bit bigger as you use new stuff. So I'm looking forward to running Hexorus for a vampire army, essentially. And then other gaming stuff-wise, playing Kingdom Death, which is a hard solo play board game with some very horrific models. And that's really good fun. And I think the best way to describe it is has emergent role play. So it has a lot of random events and things going on. So you can't get too attached to your settlers who are in this nightmarish kind of underworld. And instead you kind of have to think of yourself as like the demigod of the settlement. you're that character. You're not the little people, because if you get too attached, they're going to die and you get upset.
So it's a little bit
And
like for old school gamers, Populous, where you're
yes, kind of, yeah.
above them.
Populous, bit of Civ, bit of Necromunda, that kind of thing in there.
That sounds cool.
And then we're getting together a role play group here. I think we're going to play slowly. We've got to haze the new player, not haze, but like it should be fine. You know, fortunately, you ask friends that live locally where you move somewhere, and then finally you find someone. So my plan's to run Geist finally. So that will be a game set in Paris. So there'll be a bit of themes of stuff like alchemy and things best left forgotten. Because in Geist, of course, you can always dig up things, or at least summon the ghost of someone that might remember something that is best left forgotten. So I think that's gaming wise for me. And then Sam, you've been doing some writing type stuff for some characters for inspiration for anything?
I'm actually writing a lot of like prose poetry at the moment, so it's completely different for me right now. I'm hoping to launch a new Instagram with all my art and photography and writing on it soon. So that's what I'm working on.
There's a lot of I think the thing that's going to help you with that is that around Sheffield there's quite a lot of like abandoned buildings. That's kind of again
old
that
steel works and things like that. Yeah. So we're hoping to do some urban exploration.
Yes.
I'm feeling a little better. So
yes. And go to the local cemetery.
Yeah, the Sheffield General Cemetery, which is a Victorian cemetery, which is it's very well looked after by a trust to take care of it, and it's quite overgrown, but really great for taking photos. So I'm excited to go there soon.
That sounds great.
So yeah, that sounds like actually some decent stuff going on. Oh, one last thing, because obviously that's close to my heart and related because it's horror related. I'll be running in just over a week's time a one-shot adventure for some of the guys at the gaming club of Iron Kingdoms roleplay. So I've gone back to the very first adventure that I wrote as an intro game for that, which Sam played in, and have reworked it and updated it. So much stuff has come out since then. And it's basically Sleepy Hollow meets Brotherhood of the Wolf. So the Beast of Gévaudan, but done with a Iron Kingdoms twist. So yeah,
that'll know how that goes.
It worked well the first time round, and I think this time round, I don't feel hopeful for the guys. I don't feel hopeful for them one bit because they've gone for a very different adventuring party. Oh well. Anyway, less about that then. Let's get on to the main segment of the show, which we don't have a name for. Chronicles of Darkness is the new name for the second edition, essentially, of New World of Darkness. And we had something of a, I guess, it was never going to be this big fat book and being the second edition book that I have in front of me, which you can get through Drive-Thru RPG right now. And it's very good in a premium printing, a very good copy. Not as the same as the old traditional print run books, but it's almost as good. And so we had, I won't say preview, but some of the rules here were released as part of the God Machine Chronicles update to the previous edition's rule book. So it basically guides you to which bits you had to ignore and which bits you had to use and what changes were there. So underlying the system, I would say the dice mechanics haven't changed at all. We still got, take this attribute, take this skill, add them together. That's how many dice you roll against a fixed difficulty. The things which operate now on top of it, which I think are and going forward into the other game lines, are the key differences which push this game even further away from World of Darkness, I think, is the change of how morality is used and how your characters psychologically degenerate. And we have now this thing known as the integrity system. So, David, how much have you loved this new system? What do you take from this and think, wow, that's cool, I can't wait to use it? Or how much do you feel this is a substantial difference to the classic World of Darkness with its typical humanity system and its old school morality system?
Well, it's quite an interesting experience for me, because I predominantly, in fact, entirely, all my experience of World of Darkness has been through as a player rather than running the games, which I think differentiates me from a lot of the other people who do World of Darkness podcasts, which tend to be very much storyteller-centric. So my GM for the long-running vampire game I've been in since, I think, 2011, and is still going on now, started to incorporate some of the new ideas into his game when Vampire the Requiem 2nd edition, or as it was known at the time, the Strix Chronicles, Blood and Smoke. So it's hard for me to say with regards to the mechanical elements, because there was a kind of a blurring together of them in terms of my experience. However, having read both the old New World of Darkness core book and Chronicles of Darkness, I was particularly impressed by the chapter Black Thread Storytelling, which has lots of useful advice for any character-focused horror role-playing game, not just Chronicles of Darkness, I felt. I was particularly interested in the various suggestions for how you could divide the storyteller role. So in the long-running vampire game I've been in, the players and storyteller bounce ideas as to where to take the story next off each other before and after every session. So it feels very collaborative. It's not that the storyteller is withholding too much of the mystery. But I've never played in a multi-storyteller campaign. I just wondered, have you done that? Have you had any experience of that? So where it might shift from week to week who's taking on the storyteller role?
Never. I've never done that. I'm not too sure whether that's something I personally would find as enjoyable as a GM. I think that's because I quite like having that kind of author control over where the game's going and what the story is and the themes that I'm trying to tell. But I think maybe Chronicles of Darkness, especially a Mortals game, maybe fits that possibly better, because I think with such the lack of meta plot for starters and how open the setting is, it perhaps lends itself to players possibly having reoccurring characters, and everyone has a character that they can use, including whoever's, everyone's going to be a GM, and so that means everyone has a player character maybe. But I think maybe you could possibly run a chronicle of connected stories, but the characters themselves aren't connected, so it's a bit more like a I'm trying to think of the term for that type of TV show. But, like the old Hunger TV series, or even like the Twilight Zone or the Outer Limits. You've got these episodes, but they're all self-contained.
An anthology show.
That's the word I was looking for. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah. Or, of course, you could run it sort of like, I guess, like the X-Files, but rather than you've just got Mulder and Scully, you've got like a larger cast of investigators.
Yeah, so each week it might be a Monster of the Week type episode or session as a one-shot, and whoever takes on the storyteller role perhaps has to come up with the idea and the concept, and it'll be run for a session. Another idea that I thought might work quite well is if you were doing it with in a one-shot type environment, maybe something like a haunted house mystery, where everyone's throwing ideas into the mix and you try to share the storytelling role that way. If there's no kind of human agency or human level intelligence agency at work, that could work, perhaps.
I think that type of play style we've actually done. Sam, do you remember when we played Fiasco?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do, yeah.
And so that in that, I can't quite remember the mechanics. There was a way that you tied each of your actions to each other, but then I think it had a self-contained system where eventually you had to refer to it, and it told you what happened to your character based upon some of the choices you made. So
yeah.
Do you remember much more of it, or am I?
The game in particular we played was kind of a lock, stock, smoking barrel type game. Like, it was very
Gangsters
British
in London.
Gangsters type.
So is it heist?
Fun. And no, it was about. I remember there being a corpse, definitely.
It was just a series
in
of
a freezer.
A series of bad things happening, and it all just snowballed together in one location, which I guess works into the idea of a haunted house. So I think what you would need there is to do the haunted house approach, and I'm sure there's a Fiasco package that shows you how to do this, is if you have enough structures that everything that all the players are putting in leads you to a climax and finale where there is a satisfactory conclusion where the players all feel like they've now got something at risk, and it somehow allows you to resolve that.
Like, well, we also had we had the characters who were kind of governing what was going on. The characters who were responsible for the things going on, and then you have other people that kind of get swept up into it. Who are kind of innocent characters who just happen to be there at the time, and what happens to them and the choices they make, even though they're not really involved in the events, which is quite interesting.
So I think it definitely work. It's just not something I've had any real experience with.
Yeah, my concern is having no frame of reference. I was reading through some of the ideas and they sounded intriguing, but I wondered whether the level of preparation that'd be required to put them into place and make them work satisfactorily might actually be far greater than the traditional GM role, where they can, you could ask players for, what sort of atmosphere are you interested in? Do you want a kind of slow burn horror or something more visceral and intense, but ultimately maintain that authorial control? Because I guess there may be a danger that it ends up satisfying no one.
Yes. I think everyone has to be on board what the story is attempting to be in tone, and if some people aren't fully committed to that, I could see it being derailed, and I think that's part of having the right type of group for it. So It may be something you can do after having done a very long chronicle, and everyone's got an idea of possibly how you as a GM run the game, and maybe you've already also run another chronicle's being run by another person in the group, and they run their chronicles in roughly the same manner, and that means everyone has the same sort of reference from which they can then go, well, if we all have that experience, we know what type of game that we want out in the end, then we can all work towards that common goal. Whereas if you've got players that are a bit more just antagonistic and just want to, hunt the scary thing, kill the scary thing, then maybe they're not going to quite work in that type of game because they just want to play. But it's definitely something to look into. It also, I would say that is also one of the play styles suggested for Mummy the Curse, because of course in that game you have as a suggestion you have a rotating it rotates who gets to play the mummy in the player troop, and the rest of the players play the mummy's cult. So having that role, change between stories or between sessions, at least means then each player is contributing to this character that is, of course, relative to the other characters, is monumentally powerful. And it also means then each player can help construct the background of a mummy, which in that game, a mummy is, how can we put it? Mummy the Curse is basically Highlander in some respects, because the mummy has come back to life every so often over the centuries or eons, that they've lived so many different lifetimes that they have quite the mishmash of memories. So you can kind of, each player can bring something to kind of maybe even detail a certain time period where that mummy was alive, not alive, they're undead, but awake and operating. So that playstyle is definitely valid.
And you could definitely see how a mummy that's awoken at various different stages and has lost memories could have multiple personalities attached to the memories and be a much more fragmented character than pretty much any of the other game lines.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
So, but I think that would still give more of a framework where you have a storyteller, and so maybe you could use some of those ideas in this chapter to help with running Mummy the Curse, perhaps? Suggest people read it.
Possibly so. Okay. So that was the Black Threads. Was there anything else that you wanted to pick out from there, or?
Well, other than, I think it's something that has come up a few times when I've thought about running a New World of Darkness campaign, or now Chronicles of Darkness, is that it's quite a sophisticated sort of narrative that's being constructed, especially, and we've discussed in episode 0, some of the more complex and challenging lines to approach. So something like Promethean the Created, Demon the Descent, Mummy the Curse. And I found that this section was really helpful, just thinking through the mechanics of story writing for a role-playing game. I think that it's one of the clearest iterations of that explanatory section, because sometimes you'll read those sections and there's an implicit sense that people are already have a very strong grasp of what's required of them, and this is fine-tuning. I thought that this was a really, really clear, useful chapter that I can see myself going back to and referring to in future when I come to eventually running one of the many games I own.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
The other chapter that really jumped out to me was Horrors and Wonders Antagonists. And I don't know whether this will lead into our next section or we want to save this for the next section. But it basically separates into 3 sections. You have the antagonists, which are human level enemies, people that the player characters might encounter, ephemeral beings, so ghosts, spirits, and angels, and the third type, which were horrors, which are much more corporeal horrors. And I thought this was, again, a really nice way of bringing in a lot of elements that have been introduced to the New World of Darkness over time and distilling them into a very concise toolbox that you could approach with regards to constructing narratives and antagonists that are appropriate in terms of power level for mortal characters in the World of Darkness.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that this chapter is born out of the fact that the preceding books, well, game lines as well, of Chronicles of Darkness have led to a very well fleshed out understanding of the metaphysics they want to represent for at least for their ephemeral beings. So, the angels, demons, which covers both types, demons of the God Machine, demons of the Inferno, the Quashilim, which are these strange ephemeral beings that turn up in Promethean, and all the manner of spirits that you get in Werewolf, in Mage, and to a certain extent, of course, with Vampire, because of course, and Geist, because you're dealing with ghosts, and being supernatural monsters, you're more than likely going to kill some people, and they're going to come back a bit angry. So, Onyx Path has got a very good good grip on how to present these. And so what we've got is a very good, concise slice of the rules to deal with ephemeral beings. The antagonist is the typical thing you normally see in in the back of any of the previous books of antagonists. I think, again, the important point here, especially if you're new to Chronicles of Darkness, is that not every antagonist needs to be fully, have massive sheets of background and stuff. It's just the key stats on how you use them. And horrors, I would really like to see, when I look at this chapter and I look at how can you build a particular monster, and you've got a list of different abilities you can add together to create a particular, whether it is some alchemical aberration, or maybe it's the weird troglodyte creatures from the Descent. Troglodyte, the appropriate way to describe them? I don't know. They're obviously they're kind of like misshapen humans due to evolution, or cryptids, of course. You could use these quite happily to build some monsters for those games. And I would like to see this kind of chapter expanded by kind of like a second edition version of World of Darkness antagonists. Have you got a copy of that one?
I don't have a copy, but I'm familiar with it. And
so that kind of did the same thing for Chronicles of Darkness. It presented, back in first edition, it presented different types of antagonists. So it had ideas for cults, and where the thing you're really facing is just humans driven mad either by the fact the world is much darker and they've just fallen to whatever crazy ideas they have. And there is no supernatural thing that you're fighting. It is just a cult that believes in some strange belief of whatever form or shape it's taken. Or you've also got in there weird antagonists like the weird living black mold that if you're a vampire feeds on you, and it actually moves towards vampiric flesh when it detects it nearby. Or it's got that book had a build your own zombie, so you had different ways that you could put together different attributes and so forth and abilities to create zombies that would be appropriate to a particular inspiration, because of course zombies in the Day of the Dead or anything like that is quite different to the zombie-like creatures in, say, World War Z or
28 Days Later.
28 Days Later. So I think that book is good to go back to in conjunction with this chapter to build different types of horrors.
And that sort of brings us to a point where it really differs from that first edition New World of Darkness, in that book was the core rules for all the other game lines, and that each said that you had to have a copy of that book in order to run it. So if you wanted to play Vampire the Requiem, you had to have the core New World of Darkness book. That my understanding is that certainly with Vampire the Requiem second edition and going forward, all the new rules, all the rules required to play the game will be in those books. So that is standalone. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, that is completely correct. The only way you can basically describe Chronicles of Darkness as a book for the other game lines is that you've got maybe a more fleshed out description of how certain systems work, which, while they're presented in those game lines, the descriptions in those books are obviously competing for space with the very setting relevant information for those games. So, if you want more conditions, which we can talk about briefly, or you want to build for Vampire an interesting antagonist that isn't one of the Strix or isn't one of Belial's Brood or Seven or some other vampiric creation like a Hellhound or something, then you can always come back to this book and use it. Or of course, if you want to have ghosts, you come back to this book. You've got all the rules for manifestations and bans and influences, which are appropriate for ghosts, because the Strix are not, as far as ephemeral beings are concerned, the Strix are not really the same as other spirits. They're similar, but they're not the same. So yeah, this book is very much a very good companion to have with those other books, especially if you then start to want to introduce, say, cross splat books. So in other words, you want to have, like, it may be feasible that you're running a vampire game, but you want more fleshed out rules to deal with the mortals that are in that game because someone's playing a ghoul or something like that.
Or introduce elements of the God Machine more overtly than it being in the background.
Indeed, because there is a Vampire the Requiem Covenant that's all about following the God Machine and his transmissions. Some very strange vampires they are. And of course, that is a feature of this book, is that we have rules for angels, which, when we say angels, we're really not talking about the Archangel Michael or Gabriel. We're talking about the angels of the God Machine. And the God Machine is very much a eldritch, Lovecraftian type entity, which is using the mortal realms for its own needs to create various I'm trying to think of the word, infrastructure and occult matrices to create more angels, or to create the things that it's feeding off. What the God Machine exactly wants, I don't know, but this book, of course, presents the different tiers of games that you can play. So when we say tiers, that's whether you're playing a very, the evil is in your backyard, or the evil is in your city, or the evil is in your country, or you're trying to fight the God Machine on a cosmological kind of scale, or at least a world scale. Cosmological is another tier, which I think Mage deals with quite happily. And it talks about linchpins and how you build these infrastructure and what their weak points are, which is the linchpin, and how infrastructures are all interconnected. So I would like to run a God Machine Chronicles game. I'm wondering whether I would have more fun running a Mortals God Machine Chronicles game before running Demon. Almost running it like a mini series before running Demon would be kind of appropriate.
When we get to our cinema section, I've got some ideas for how you could bring demons from Demon Descent into a Mortals campaign. Okay. I think I might be able to answer some of your queries, because I know on Darker Days you've talked about how Demon, and I agree, the material is so evocative and the artwork's fantastic, but it's kind of, how do you think in those terms? How do you include characters that don't think? I think that demons are the only splat, although there may be more now, but I think they're the only splat that has no connection to a human identity, apart from they take on cover, but the entity was not ever human before. The entity is something, a kind of biomechanical horror, whereas most of the other splats have at least some strong connection at the heart of their identity to humanity.
Yeah, we'll get to that in the next section then. Some other things, though, we'll say about the rules. Obviously, I think one of the main differences of Chronicles of Darkness is the change of the morality system to integrity. So the point there is that I think the original Vampire, the Masquerade, and World of Darkness morality system was about, like, doing bad things made you mad, which is made you degenerate in your humanity, which was always considered, especially when more modern writers got in on the act with World of Darkness, was considered a very kind of Victorian approach to it. Whereas the integrity system is really about how to deal with stress and trauma and shock. And certain characters, of course, are going to be more conditioned to deal with those things than others. And to help them deal with those things, they have anchors. Anchors being people, things, places they care about that help them resist and replenish their integrity, so that they don't just go off mad. So in that respect, I feel like Chronicles of Darkness feels a bit more like contemporary, a bit more Call of Cthulhu in the approach of how it's dealing with the things that drive people mad is not doing evil, is not necessarily doing what are considered cardinal sins, because just because you're a thief doesn't make you less of a human. Things like that. In some respects, you could argue being a thief actually makes you more of a human when you've got things like demons and so forth running around.
Yeah, an element of, and it's worse in computer game RPGs where they have a morality system. You're free to choose whatever actions, but if you choose the wrong course of action, then you will be punished by the mechanics of the system. So a game such as Baldur's Gate, you can play as an evil character, but the story makes no sense, and you'll be attacked relentlessly by the city guards for doing that. I think that really what World of Darkness is all about for me, Chronicles of Darkness, I need to be careful about crossing those and using them interchangeably going forward. But they're about difficult moral choices, not about being good. And it really doesn't make a huge amount of sense to play a game as consciously trying to be evil. Instead, it's a very morally ambiguous world, and the cosmology of it is also similarly complex. And it's very difficult to know what's the right decision to take. So a system that's more about dealing with the things that you have to encounter and whether or not you can take those stresses and the effects that they have on the character. As you say, it moves away from a Victorian morality system and opens up, I think, a far broader range of choices. And I think that are actually more in line as we go forward with this podcast, looking at contemporary film and television, from Breaking Bad to Hannibal, really the kind of narratives that really seem to be inspiring people are very complex and morally grey in their tone.
Morally grey is fun.
Does this mean we actually have to watch Breaking Bad then?
Oh, painful decision.
Painful.
I'm not going to.
We tried before.
Yeah.
I can.
I don't think we're going to be very popular with people.
Oh, well.
Yes, there's actually too much TV now that's of a really high quality and relevant to this podcast. We could pretty much do nothing but watch TV and still not cover absolutely everything. So I think
that's the thing. There's so much to watch these days, which is fantastic, but also kind of stressful at the same time.
I'm also sick of, on a brief tangent, I'm sick of having to do the classic thing of, oh, it'll get better, and if you get past the first season, if you get past the first 2 seasons, it gets better. I'm not going to do that. I've got too many toy soldiers to paint. I've got too much wargaming to do, and other things, and reading books, and actually running games to plonk my ass down in a show, in front of a show that will get better once I've watched 12 hours of it.
Yes,
yeah.
There are plenty of shows out there that are great from the get-go. At the moment, there are so many series that I and my wife have started and then just not had time to go back to. On Amazon, Mr. Robot, we saw the first episode of that. It's fantastic, really engaging, really interesting, and that was about 2 months ago. At some point, we'll watch episode 2.
We brought up Hannibal. I was going to something related to it, and I noticed this. I don't think it was actually in the God Machine Chronicles rules expansion, but it's in this book. It gives a bit more laid out rules on investigations, and one of the important things it says here is there are no binary roles. So essentially, what Chronicles of Darkness is trying to present is a nice structure for how to build your investigation scenes for your characters. And one of the important things in this is it's not whether your characters are going to find clues or not, because if they don't find clues, if they find no clues at all, the game doesn't progress any further. It gets stuck, because what's the point of that? You want to tell the story, and the issue is how well the characters get through the story.
So the
Putting roadblocks in the way is pointless.
The classic issue that's raised by that is in Call of Cthulhu, where you'll have to make a spot hidden roll or libraries roll in order to find the clue to progress, and potentially you can just not make that roll. And the GM or keeper in Call of Cthulhu terms can find other ways of feeding that in, but it becomes increasingly contrived. And this system that Onyx Path are using here reminds me of the Gumshoe system. I don't know if you've got any familiarity.
Exactly, yeah. We've played Gumshoe, haven't we, Sam?
Have we?
Trail of Cthulhu?
Trail of Cthulhu, yeah.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I can't remember what we played. We played an adaptation of the was it Rats in the Walls, or was it something else?
Oh yeah, I do remember there were rats.
And I think there was another one where there was some crazy painting, and my character just went, "Oh, what a lovely crazy painting," because it's Cthulhu. But yeah, you're right. It's this stinks of Gumshoe, but that's good because it works and it pushes the story forward.
Absolutely. And so in Gumshoe and Trail of Cthulhu, the idea is that you will find the clues. It's just what do you do with them, as opposed to you could just be, I'm in this room. What do I see? I don't know. Make a roll. Oh, I failed. Nothing. You saw nothing. And it's not really what the game should be about. So I think that's a very healthy development in investigative role-playing.
Definitely. And I think that's where you can see that Chronicles of Darkness pulls from with its condition system, which is what I refer to as essentially nudge mechanics, because it's telling you that if you take on a condition, if you take on something that's negative to your character and you play into it, you're going to get beats, which convert into experience points. If you play with that and you play with that is very much like the Fate system. It has its inspirations from that. This investigation system, obviously, we've said is very similar to Gumshoe, and it's no surprise that Chronicles of Darkness is borrowing good design mechanics, and I think because it's trying to push itself further and further away from classic World of Darkness, then I'm not surprised it's doing these things. It's making itself a very good system for running personal horror games, more so than say Gumshoe system, and more so than say than Fate. There's some other things in there in the rule system, but I mean, everything else hasn't changed too much. They've changed how combat works. So essentially, weapons when they hit give you a dice bonus straight to the damage. You don't roll the full dice pool with the bonus from the weapon, meaning that if you don't, that you can get between 0 and nothing, you now actually get the bonus on the damage. It makes things a little bit more lethal, and I'm happy with that. Nothing wrong with characters dying too easily. I mean, we've played enough Unhallowed Metropolis, and that's got a very high kill count in that game. Or good old Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, that's always notorious for characters dying left, right, and centre.
Losing limbs.
Losing limbs, going a bit mad, carrying around someone's head in your satchel. All the fun of tongue-in-cheek horror.
There are actually quite a few parallels between Chronicles of Darkness and where the new Delta Green RPG are heading. So they've got a mechanic. I haven't got the book yet. I've backed it at some point. I look forward to reading it. But the idea of kill damage and just making combat increasingly deadly, so that players really have to think about, do we want this to escalate to combat? Are there other ways around it? And I think if you want to encourage character-driven investigative games, making combat increasingly deadly means that it's not the default option when things go wrong. You have to try, it encourages players to try to think laterally and think around other possible avenues to escape from a situation.
Cool. Okay. I don't think is there anything more to say about the changes to the rules? Because I mean, we could go into it for days and days and days, but a lot of it is is going to be familiar if you've played the first edition. A lot of it's going to be familiar if you've got the God Machine Chronicles expansion. And really, as a system, it's brought in like things that from I'm trying to think. It's brought in like there's some new merits which I really like how you build. There are sample merits and sample cults, so it's how to use your. There's a merits for a mystery cult. There is how your professions, which comes from Hunter the Vigil, so that's now part of the system as well. There's a lot in here, and it's a very good book to have next to you when running Vampire the Requiem 2nd edition or any of the others.
The core target market for this is perhaps people entering into Chronicles of Darkness who haven't played Old World of Darkness, New World of Darkness. I think this condenses a lot of information. It updates what was in the core book. It integrates the elements that were introduced with the God Machine. And I think it does so in a very neat and accessible way that, say, a couple of years ago, when you had Old World of Darkness, New World of Darkness, 2nd edition New World of Darkness, which is slightly incomprehensible to people who have no background with regards to the game. I think this is far clearer, and I think that hopefully it will make it open up to a new set of people who want to use a storyteller system in this way.
Right, I think that's enough gaming chat about rules and stuff in here. I don't think we went too heavy. Even on Darker Days, we never go that heavy on rules. Thank God, because it can get really boring just talking about stat lines. Yeah, I need, like I said, I've got some ideas of I need to run. I think my Chronicles of Darkness game using God Machine, like what I want to do for Demon, is mostly going to use Berlin as a setting. You like the idea of Berlin as a setting for a Chronicle, Sam?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've been there once. You've got kind of a feel for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a mishmash of a city, so of old and new, east and west. So, and it is one of the suggested settings for Demon the Descent. So to use it as a Chronicles of Darkness setting using the God Machine Chronicles ideas would be good fun.
Would you set it in contemporary Berlin or during the Cold War?
I think I want to go with contemporary because there's still quite a lot of upheaval going on, and visually there's a lot of juxtaposition between both let's just say pre-World War architecture followed by very the kind of brutalist communist kind of architecture that you have, and then you've also now got like the government buildings for Germany. They're very ultra modern. They're like massive concrete structures with like massive circles of glass and everything. So I think visually for me it engages me, and I can get a feeling of like there are different types of cogs. Not all cogs are going to look the same, and I think that'll be maybe the point of the of a Chronicles of Darkness, God Machine Chronicles game for mortals. Yeah,
sounds great.
Yeah, I just need to come up with some ideas. I need to run Geist first. I think that's the main thing. Okay, if that's the end of that segment, we will now move on over to our Kirlian Camera segment. So this segment is a little bit like The Secret Frequency, but rather than us using real-world horror, we're going to be plumbing the depths of TV and cinema and finding what wonderful, wonderful films there are to inspire us, or potentially what wonderfully awful horror films there are and what we can rescue from them. Because sometimes you do watch a horror film and just end up going, that was naff, but that one little thing there can be rescued for a game. So, let's do the world good in both ways. So what was the theme for this? We're going for like urban
horror. I was going to ask, how are we defining urban horror? Is it just low-level horror in a built-up setting, or are we talking a link to urban legends, or a mixture of the two?
Sam?
I would say kind of a mixture, because it's more like contemporary horror than, because when you say urban, like one of the examples we've got is actually like in a suburban setting, so it's not meant to be taken literally, I don't think.
Sure, it's a sensibility.
Yeah.
I think it's meant to be that kind of like, it's the horror which lurks just around the corner of your street.
Yeah.
And whether that is the built-up metropolis of London, or down in its dirty depths in the underground system, or it could be another city that isn't so built up and a lot more run down, or somewhere maybe like Detroit, where it's obviously is a large city, it is built up, but it's not as populated, and that in some respects lends to the horror.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could just be, as you said, suburbia. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So which film do we want to start off with first? Sam, where do you want to start? We've already talked a lot. Let's have Sam pick something.
I'm gonna say Mothman, because to introduce it, I actually have some notes on the actual story of Mothman, just to introduce the plot of the movie for those who haven't seen it. So these are kind of descriptions of the events by Lauren Coleman, who's a cryptozoologist and a friend of John Keel, who actually experienced the events in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So on November 15th, 1966, 4 individuals, which were 2 married couples, were at a lover's lane in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The 2 couples saw 2 giant red eyes. They were very scared. The Mothman creature was described as 6 to 7 feet tall, with these red eyes and no head, as if the eyes were in the breast area. It also had huge wings. The creature came toward them, they ran away, and the creature followed. It followed them right up to the city limits. The incident was reported to the local sheriff, who went to the lover's lane and searched around. He actually saw a puff of smoke in a nearby area, possibly the creature taking off and landing again. The account was ridiculed in the local press, but more and more people began to see the creature. Over the next 13 months, over 200 people had some interaction with strange phenomena. At least half of them described the creature. The name for the creature actually came from a copy editor at the local newspaper. The creature had wings, but Batman was on TV at the time, so they didn't want to call it Batman. Instead, they called it Mothman, and the name stuck. In 66 to 67, Point Pleasant suffered a lot more paranormal and creepy events, including things like UFO sightings and mutilated dogs, among other things. A month after the initial sightings, John Keel, a news reporter, he got a contract in Point Pleasant to write a book about UFOs. As he gathered info from locals, he got very deeply involved in the events, and entities actually began to contact him via telephone. He claimed that the town was a vortex of phenomena. He had begun to receive prophecies from these entities, and one of the entities told him that when President Johnson turns on the Christmas lights at the White House, the whole Northeast is going to go into a blackout. So in December, Keel was waiting for the blackout in his Manhattan apartment. Nothing happened, but 6 minutes later, the news reported the collapse of a bridge across the Ohio River. This was the Silver Bridge, which crossed the Ohio River between Gallipolis, Ohio, and Point Pleasant, West Virginia. 67 people fell into the river, 46 died. They found 44 bodies. Several people who died were related to witnesses of the Mothman. John Keel published his account of the events in 1975, and he since said that the phenomenon can't really be characterized or categorized, and that's it. So it was never really explained or anything. The movie itself is based on these events. At the end, it's worth noting that the movie does say that they never found a reason for the bridge falling apart, but they did actually find a reason. That's a lie. They didn't.
What was the reason they found?
I think it was something like too much weight at the time for the suspension.
Mm.
You know, just an accident, really.
So in the film, there's a problem with the traffic lights. So you have
yes, there is, yeah,
queues of cars nose to nose going both ways, and so presumably the excess weight of that many vehicles on the bridge at one point in time could put into a level of strain that it perhaps couldn't cope with. And that was really, really interesting. And I think that it ties into both low level horror and also urban legends, because when you were talking about the way in which multiple people started seeing the Mothman, it reminded me of the wave of UFO sightings in the States. And what becomes problematic is that for people who want to debunk them, that it's very easy to suggest that that's a wave of mass hysteria, that once the idea has been put in their mind, that people will see, they want to see. So the whole Fox Mulder, I want to believe. So I rewatched the Mothman Prophecies last night as preparation for this podcast, and I think it really holds up. The first time I watched it, I was slightly disappointed by the ending, because it remains ambiguous right to the final credits. There's no kind of big reveal as to what the nature of the horror is. But watching it again, I actually really admire their willingness to maintain this sense of unease rather than slip into using some of the tried and tested tricks for generating horror that could have been brought in. So what I'm focused on is the core narrative of the film and how you could perhaps bring elements of Demon Descent into Immortals campaign. So building on what Sam's just said, the film is more or less about multiple encounters with supernatural entities that are trying, somewhat unsuccessfully, to communicate with humans about impending disasters. So that communication may be very cryptic, but they also cause accidents, harming those they communicate with, and frequently drive people insane. And so there's this sense that they are warning, or they have prophecies about impending disasters, but it's not clear as to what their motivation is. Are they trying to stop these things from happening? Or, as one character in the film suggests, they're perhaps trying to manipulate people to be in the area the disasters are going to happen in order to kill them. And that made me think of potentially, if you take that approach, you could think of them in terms of instances of angels of the God Machine that are giving people these prophecies in order to nudge them in the right direction, to get them to go to a place where disaster is going to happen in order for them to die as part of the God Machine's plans. Or, for instance, if they were demons from Demon Descent, and it's perhaps worth just mentioning here that essentially demons from Demon Descent are angels that have become self-aware and have unhooked themselves from the God Machine and have taken on their own new identities. So, for instance, one of the motivations for demons and Demon Descent is that they want to foil the plans of the God Machine. Having broken free of it, they want to remain free of it and thwart its plans. So you could have a Mortals game where there are a sequence of encounters that end up driving people insane. In the film, people's eyes bleed, their ears bleed, and there's a sense that these entities aren't doing that deliberately. They just don't know how to communicate with humans without breaking them. So, you could have play roles from the film, such as journalists and police officers investigating these encounters, or perhaps they could be those who've survived an encounter and are driven to understand the cryptic messages imparted to them. One of the characters in the film becomes completely obsessed with trying to understand what these warnings might mean and what he should do about them. So I found it very rich as a source of potential inspiration for bringing angels and demons into a mortal's game and retaining that sense of an alien intelligence.
I mean, there's different ways you could play it. Obviously, in the Chronicles of Darkness book, they have the Mothman as a antagonist you can use, and a bit of description on how to use it. As you say, the more information it dishes out, the more it tries to interact with humans, more bad stuff happens, or more chaos is unleashed. It's interesting. I mean, if it was angels, then the question is what type of angel it is of the God Machine. Is it trying to set things up so it can destroy a whole load of people at the right time, part of some strange occult matrix for the God Machine? Or maybe more interesting is if for a bunch of demon characters that they're chasing down each individual person that's interacted with the Mothman and trying to save them, because they know deep down they're going to die, because the demons can perceive the occult matrix that's being formed. So I think there's definitely different angles you can make use of the story and the events in the film, because the important thing in the film, where Hollywood takes reign of the story, is that, as Sam said, was it 67 people died?
Yeah.
And
67 people fell into the
river.
river.
So I think in the film they make the point that that Richard Gere's character, because of his interactions with the Mothman, interactions with the other people that have seen the Mothman, that he's able to save one person, and then they realize the significance of the number they heard originally, and that the number of people dead now.
Laura Linney's character had a dream involving the number 37, and she would have been the 37th person to have died on the bridge, but he saves her, and it's estimated that 36 people died, and that's when they realize that it's actually significant.
Yeah, so I think there's some fun there, that as a storyteller you can try and construct some strange infrastructure or strange prophecy, and see your players trying to
you can also have these type of guardian angel characters as neutral characters as part of a story with a different antagonist, because if they are neutral, you've talked about them being evil or trying to help people, whether are they doing this on purpose to push people toward disaster, or are they trying to stop people from getting killed in a disaster? What if it's neither? Because when you talk about their confusion in trying to communicate, it's it doesn't necessarily have to be one thing or the other. They're just telling people that they're prophesizing.
Yeah, you can definitely just have a flat neutrality to it. It's interesting. It's interesting bringing up that kind of neutrality, because I think that blends into how you can make use of the Quishilim from Promethean, because even though they're angelic, fiery beings of Pyros, the very the very flame of existence from this other realm, they come in two types. There's the one which is almost driving change for positive reasons, and there's one which is more creating chaos, just sheer chaos. again to drive change, but it's more in a destructive manner. And again, you can draw those beings into other games and into a Mortals game. So just because they turn up in Promethean doesn't mean they're stuck there. You can make use of them.
Yeah, like not
Absolutely.
chaos for a higher purpose, but just chaos
no,
because
it's just,
chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually, they become quite interesting if you use it in conjunction with the God Machine Chronicles, because I think the Quishilim are the antithesis of the God Machine Angels, because the God Machine Angels are very much like these rigid entities working for some strange, but it is a plan, whereas the Quishilim are far more free of that and more kind of divine inspiration type creatures.
Absolutely. At one point, just to tie into this notion of neutrality, Richard Gere's character, who he actually plays John Klein, asks, well, if they're a superior intelligence to us, why can't they communicate? And the cultist he speaks to said, you're a superior entity to a cockroach. Have you ever tried explaining anything to them?
I was going to mention that, yeah.
So I think that, and again, that creates a manageable campaign, because one thing that we perhaps haven't touched upon yet is the notion of you're running a Mortals game rather than a mage game or a werewolf game or a vampire game. If the antagonists are above a certain power level, there may be absolutely nothing that Mortals can do. But an entity that's more neutral, there's a sense in the film that there's no way he can stop the Mothman, or Injured Cole, I think is the name he's given. But he's still trying to interact with it and figure out what's happening. That's a way of bringing in quite a high power level creature without it all breaking down entirely.
Cool. I don't think there's much more to add on the Mothman and the Mothman Prophecies film. Which movie do we move on to next on our list?
Which one do you fancy?
Go on, pick another one, Sam.
I'm picking them, am I?
Yeah, you're picking them.
I guess It Follows.
It Follows. Okay. I'm not gonna. I'm gonna be. I'm not the person who has to summarize this film. Maybe so. Do you want to lead us into it again?
I actually don't have any notes on the summary today.
Okay.
I did notes on other things, but not on the actual storyline.
So, It Follows begins with a rather innocent sexual encounter. What was initially perceived as an innocent sexual encounter between a girl, a boy, slightly older boy, and there's a bit of foreshadowing when they go to the cinema where he tries to point out this woman and she doesn't spot her in the crowd. And then of course, in a rather kind of shocking scene, he basically uses chloroform or something like that, knocks her out, and then when she comes to, she's bound to this wheelchair, and this strange entity approaches them, and of course, in the time it takes for it to approach them, the boy explains that it'll appear either as someone that she knows, someone that's dead, or someone that she's never met before. And
yeah, it always looks human.
Yeah. And then before it gets too close, obviously, he wheels the girl away, and he makes the point that he's passed it on to her. So now he used to have to deal with it. He can still see it, but she's now the one that it's now following. And no one else.
But if it kills her, it'll come after him, so it'll go back up the chain.
And of course, no one else who's either it's currently following or it's previously been following. If you're not one of those people, good luck, because good for you, because you can't see it, but you can if you begin to realize weird things are going on, and you begin to believe your friend who is seeing this thing. You can begin to interact and impede it, even though it is to you invisible. So as the film progresses, essentially it's this girl's increasing anxiety and fear as she has to keep questioning whether the person that she's seeing that's approaching her is this thing or it isn't, and it is just who. And she has to obviously question the person in front of her is this entity or it isn't, and so that's why she has to stay with friends and make sure that they can see this entity or not. And eventually, it's her convincing her friends that it exists and trying to conceive of a way of or not conceive of a way, but initially getting past the morally questionable issue of should she pass it on. So that means also engaging in sex with someone else to pass it on to them, and dealing with the problem that it may kill them, and coming to terms with the fact that she may have passed on this monster to someone else. And after an attempt or two at that have failed, and her best friend has died due to her passing it on to him. Spoilers, yeah. We're talking about films, so there's going to be spoilers in this. Yeah. But the thing is that they formulate a plan to try and kill this monster, to kill this entity, which is not entirely. It works, but it only works for a short period of time. It's a brief respite before again it's following her again.
Well, no, not necessarily.
Well,
that's not. The ending is ambiguous.
Yeah.
The ending is shown that they're walking along hand in hand and they are being followed by somebody, but it
True.
could just be an ordinary person. So that's the thing.
Yeah. I mean, what more do you want to add to it then from there?
About what?
About anything to the film. I mean, the score is very kind of 80s kind of horror.
I would say that I like the score at points, but I think it can be a bit over the top.
Okay.
In some scenes, I think it gets a bit too heavy. But mostly I like it. Yeah, I think it's some things to note about the movie. And I think this was a deliberate choice on part of the director, is that it's set in suburbia, in the suburbs of Detroit, so nice suburbs, and it's quite focused on white privilege. So all the kids in it are white, really, and they're pretty much untouched, or seemingly untouched, by urban issues such as STDs, drugs, and violence. And the fact that they actually have to go deeper into the city of Detroit to actually try and find out answers about this entity. And sort of they actually even mentioned that their parents wouldn't let them go into Detroit, and it's kind of like the whole thing is like a metaphor for you think these things can't touch you, but they can. They can affect anybody. It doesn't matter where you are socially.
Yeah, I guess in that way it's drawn on the idea like how HIV was, and AIDS was that disease of limited to a certain
subset or class of people, even.
Yeah.
It's getting rid of that stigma.
Yeah.
Really. I would also say that its treatment of sex is not really slut shamey like a lot of earlier movies featuring teens, like slasher movies where the girl has sex and she gets punished for it because obviously sex is bad and dirty.
If they die or all their friends die.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, it seems to be that there are certain parts which are, to me, seem like a metaphor for like the male gaze. The camera angles. There are a lot of scenes with like boys watching. There are boys watching her when she's in the pool.
Okay, yeah.
And then her friend watching her through the window. and things like that. They're really things that you notice on a second watch, really, more than anything. The cinematography, the coloring is very notably light instead of dark. Like a horror movie can usually be quite, take a shortcut with making things look dark to make them seem dark. But this is a different type of darkness, if you know what I mean.
I think I can definitely get that, because sometimes that's a good point. Because sometimes my criticism of some horror movies these days, or actually quite a lot of films, it's like you're watching it, like, I can't see what's going on.
Yeah. It's also quite ambiguous in time period because of the usage of the soundtrack, and actually, how it's all, very the color schemes that are used within the houses, everything looks quite dated. So it's kind of, it's a throwback to these 70s and 80s movies with teenagers where bad things happen. Basically, I'm just looking at my notes. I say basically a lot, just to warn you. The fact that it's got a laid-back suburban atmosphere, it's juxtaposed by claustrophobia, anxiety, dread. I would say it's a lot more of a dread type movie than a horror movie. It doesn't seem as immediately horrific. There's a couple of scenes which are, I would say, are reasonably shocking. I think of one in particular, but the teens aren't reckless or stupid. They're just normal, unlike other slasher features where it seems that they're being punished for that behavior. And sometimes you actually watch and think, well, yeah, you're stupid. You not that you should be punished, but of course these things are happening because you're doing something ridiculous. But they're not. They're just being normal teenagers. I think the absence of, like any parents in this movie, it sort of amplifies the feeling of loneliness and helplessness that you feel during adolescence. And the idea that you're isolated and different, like, with this happening to you and your friends not understanding or believing you, which kind of sometimes happens with things that you feel during teenhood and adolescence in general. And finally, I would also say that I don't really see this as a feminist movie, but I also don't see it as an unfeminist movie. So that's my thoughts on that whole debate.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I feel about it.
David?
So yeah, I think Sam's raised a lot of the key points about the film. The soundtrack for me, I'm pretty sure I saw an interview where the person who put together the soundtrack was very much an homage to John Carpenter. So yes. Soundtracks like to Halloween and The Thing, and you can hear that very distinctly. So I wonder, just picking up on what Sam suggested, whether the film is implicitly set in an earlier era. Can you remember if people use mobile phones? Because that's usually quite good.
I think I spotted something that looked like a smart device.
Yes, but they seem to keep it to a minimum on purpose. So yeah, it can
so
be
it's
interpreted.
kind of
yeah.
So it's I guess like Twin Peaks was contemporary and 1950s. Maybe It Follows is contemporary and 1980s, and that overlapped in terms of setting. Some of the things, there were definitely some really striking scenes in the film. One of the problems for me is that they do this setup that this creature can look like someone you know, can sneak up on you and kill you instantly. And yet the creature almost always appears as something completely incongruous to the setting. I'm thinking about the university when it turns up as an old woman in a hospital gown, shuffling along, and you can see it from about 500 meters away. And I understand why you would do that, because visually it's more arresting than it would be otherwise. But that I found a little bit problematic in terms of the sense of horror. I do think that anytime it actually catches up with people, it becomes considerably more sinister.
I think maybe that's one of the points of it, though, is that you, at first, when you start seeing it, when it's coming, because, like you said, it's so different from the surroundings, and that's going to make you all jumpy and terrified and things. But it's going to make you look out for things that look different. But then it's kind of tricking you, isn't it? Because towards the end, I mean, actually, what happens that it turns up looking like one of her friends, even though the friend is actually there at the time.
That's the one on the beach.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a sense of the threat escalating.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe you can consider that this is if you're trying to like put it into like if you want to, if you're running it in your game, what purpose do you want to give it? Maybe that's the whole point. It feeds on fear, and the only way it does that, it's got to it's got to prime you for it. It's got to
that, yeah. It's just kind of, in my opinion, sort of messing her about. Really, and the fact that it's frustrating when a creature doesn't seem to have rules in that respect, because if it doesn't have rules, you don't know how to defeat it. And it's not predictable. So I think in a way that kind of adds to the anxiety of it.
And that links to a lot of the 1980s horror franchises. So things like Nightmare on Elm Street. You keep thinking that the characters have found the formula to stop him permanently, and yet in the next film he comes back. So there's definitely some horror associated with establishing rules and then breaking them. I thought that moral choice that you brought up with regards to do you pass on the creature, and again it's almost as though the monster isn't an STD itself, but an STD that can be passed, and in so passing has kind of reduced its effect on the person. It was quite evocative for me of The Ring.
Yes.
And so some of the horror is not actually from the creature. It's that moral dilemma of, if I don't pass this on, I am likely to die. But if I do pass it on, the person I pass it on to is more than likely going to be killed at some point. And that's a really horrendous ethical decision for someone to be presented with.
Yeah.
Which makes it a great plot point for a game.
Yeah. I don't really have much more to add. I don't know whether I'm racking my brains on whether it fits in with any particular other game. I really, to be honest, I really wouldn't run it as any particular type of thing from a splat. I'd run it just as some weird unknown creature, and I think that's where it has its greatest strength. It's unknown, and not to toot its horn too much, but that's what I like about Chronicles of Darkness. Chronicles of Darkness tells you to throw in the weird stuff, because even in Requiem there are rules for even more vampires that break the rules of vampires, and for typical kindred, coming across vampires that breaks the rules, it's scary because they don't give a damn about your masquerade. So things are scary when they break the rules and they don't follow what you think is your established world, and that means you can scare monsters as well. So you could possibly, you could take that idea and you could quite easily use it for vampires, because it could be to do with feeding. So you could possibly combine it with an idea of, I think it's called, is it the man in the mirror? I think is a thing where in Requiem, when vampires look at their reflection, it's all fuzzy and everything, which is part of the masquerade. But it'd be interesting if you blended this with their reflection, and it's the man in the mirror, and obviously every time they see it in the mirror, it's getting closer.
Yeah,
absolutely. And if the creature can walk constantly, and vampires have to sleep during the day,
of course,
you have this sense of impending doom, because the vampire will have to continually move, and that means that we'll need to find lairs in different cities, places of safety, havens, etc. So you could have a kind of, whereas vampires quite often tied to a particular city, if you were going to run this in a vampire game, it might be a way of motivating and giving a reason the vampires might move from city to city or town to town, trying to outrun it within the limitations imposed by the amount of time they can actually be up and about.
It also, if you tie it to feeding and that it gets passed from vampire to human to vampire through the acts of feeding, it makes vampires really bloody scared about who they're going to feed on. It's like, someone's been poaching my herd and it's now all tainted. That's quite scary. Anyway, back to the film itself. Is there any more points to bring up on it?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, sort of as an end point, is that I read an analysis of the film, which is like, it doesn't seem to be about the dangers of sex specifically. You can take it to be like that, but it's generally that, by living life, you open yourself up to danger. And, in that sense, it's like, death is inevitable. Death is actually following us all, but we're not privy to its path, usually. So in a way, it's kind of a modern memento mori.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a good place to finish, I think.
Okay. Do we want to cover... We've got a few more films on the list. Another one that you wanted to pick? David, which one did you want to pick on the list?
I particularly like Candyman.
Okay.
We haven't watched that recently.
I haven't watched it recently, but I think...
Can you remember?
I remember most of it, but you can give us a brief synopsis, I'm sure.
Okay, it's an adaptation of a Clive Barker short story. And it shifts location to Cabrini Green and the project there. And the main character, I will just check her name, is working on urban legends and the legend of the Candyman. And so here we go. And so she's attempting to figure out why people have constructed this bogeyman figure who appears famously if you say his name 3 times while looking into a mirror. I think that's actually probably more famous than the film itself. And as it progresses and it appears that the Candyman is in fact real, the Candyman is particularly interesting because he's actually quite a tragic figure. He kills people horrifically, but what was done to him? Because back when he initially died, it was because he had a relationship with a white woman and was killed particularly horrifically, including his hand being cut off, and he's stung to death by bees. And so as the main character, whose name I'm going to... Helen Lyle, played by Virginia Madsen, as she starts to find out more about his character, when we see him, there's a sense of dread. Tony Todd is the person who plays him. He plays him supremely well. And I particularly like it because it moves away from the quite simplistic morality structure of the slasher movie, which has all sorts of problematic connections to gender identity and for the reasons that Sam brought up. And I think it's a really effective use of the space of Cabrini Green in order to evoke a certain atmosphere.
Cool. Any points to bring up, Sam? What do you remember of Candyman? I'm trying to remember more of it.
I don't remember a lot. I just remember playing it in the bathroom at school.
Okay. I think there's... The interesting thing about it is it's the very, the action of how you summon him. It's that there's a temptation there because, of course, the temptation is, well, you want to test this legend and just prove it's not anything. But it actually is, and he appears and he murders you. So I think for... as a game, it's for something to use in a game. It's interesting just as a very good example of an antagonist based around a legend, which seemingly is able to appear anywhere and attack anyone, including inside a locked bathroom. I'm not too sure what other ideas you got, David, for how you'd use it in a game.
I'd be tempted to bring in some material from Hunter.
Okay, yeah.
And in particular, the book Slashers.
Yes.
Is it Slasher or Slashers?
It's Slashers, and it's awesome.
Yes, superb. So there are two types of slasher from memory. You have the mortal serial killer, and then you have the immortal revenant type figure. Can you remember the term that's used for that?
Oh, I can't remember, but you're right. Essentially, you have different classes of slasher, so different kind of archetypes, and then they're represented, as you say, by their kind of normal, very mortal form, and then if they survive long enough and they keep killing, and they somehow build their own urban legend or mythos to themselves, they transcend their kind of mortal nature and become inhuman. Now, that may not mean they're immortal, but the classic example is you've got Michael Myers. Obviously, you shoot and he just still gets up and he's still there attacking. He disappears and then he reappears, even though you've blasted him like 3 times with your pistol.
Michael Myers is a piece of shit.
Yeah. So, are you thinking, what type of archetype are you thinking with the Candyman then?
I was thinking in terms of, I think one of the things that can become is a kind of avatar of murder. And I think that to a certain extent, what's really interesting in Candyman is that he's simultaneously a pitiless serial killer, but also quite a tragic figure, and comes to fall in love with Helen Lyle, which again I think adds a really interesting twist to, if you were bringing in a serial killer antagonist, to have a link. You can think of things like Bram Stoker's Dracula, the movie from the 1990s, and the idea of Dracula as being simultaneously an inhuman vampire, but also capable of tragic love, to have desires that aren't just about killing absolutely everyone. So I think that could make for quite a rich Mortals campaign.
He's, in some respects, he's kind of like a ghost that's become a spirit of a ghostly archetype, and the spirit of death, because there's, as you say, with his kind of like his more human nature and his still ability to fall in love, that's almost part of a way of how to resolve him and help him pass on. So in some respects, you could make a very interesting antagonist. You could use him as the basis of an antagonist for Geist. I think you would have to you can use the concept. You might just have to build a more original urban legend around him that's suitable for your setting. The moment you've got people dying when they say Candyman 3 times in front of a mirror, the game is up and your players are like, I know what you're up to. So
that comes back to this notion that presenting players with things that they haven't encountered before is one way of generating horror. And we go way back to H.P. Lovecraft. Initially, when he was writing, his Cthulhu mythos was set up to be something that departed as much as possible from traditional notions of vampires and Frankenstein's creature, etc. I think over time, a game like Call of Cthulhu, if people have been playing for a while, as soon as some clues start to emerge, the player's like, right, I know exactly what this is, and this is how you kill it. And to a certain extent, if they're good players, they will not overtly play the system and use that knowledge, that out-of-character knowledge. But one of the ways in which various games and supplements have suggested to reintroduce some of this sense of mystery and dread and horror, the idea that you're confronted with something you just don't understand and you don't know how to engage with, is to change some of the rules. So change what they are vulnerable to is a good one, or change some of the rules in terms of how they manifest and how they interact, so that the players aren't going to have that moment of, oh, okay, we're out of the moment. We know what this is.
We know how to deal with them. Get some elder sign.
Exactly.
Paint it around, and it'll be fine.
And that's not really what you want to get from Call of Cthulhu.
On that note of feeling of a sense of dread and a feeling of heightening tensions and especially in Cthulhu, the sense of becoming slowly mad. Midnight Meat Train
was terrible. It had some good ideas. I'm sure I haven't read the short story by Clive Barker, but we read the synopsis of that.
I think it's mostly far more powerful in its short form.
So Midnight Meat Train. And my notes say this is verbatim.
This is verbatim.
I hated it. So first of all, I didn't think there was any logic to the ending. I think maybe you should actually, Chris, you should do the synopsis first, so I can
So
make a point.
Let's do the synopsis of the film, not the book or not the short story. Yes. So the synopsis of the film is a New York photographer, so more of an artistic photographer, not a photojournalist. Witnesses a encounter between a woman and some hoodlums. Let's just use that term. Some gangster types, some not very nice people in the subway train. And obviously he gets up, he starts taking photos, and that gives them enough reason to back down and let her go. And then it's almost like a day or two later, he reads in the paper that this woman, who I think was a model that he recognized, that she's a model. Yeah,
she was a model.
Yeah, so she's dead, and he's like, oh, what happened there? So he begins to investigate what's going on down in the subway. And he begins to take photos and so forth and try and get an idea of what's going on. And he encounters Vinnie Jones's character. So the main character is played by Bradley Cooper.
Yes, unfortunately.
And then so he encounters Vinnie Jones's character, who we already know through what the film shows us is the Butcher. And we get some wonderfully over-the-top CGI of him killing some people and ripping them apart and so forth. But you don't know why. You just think he's just a serial killer. And then there's a few encounters where Bradley Cooper witnesses him doing this on the train, and then eventually gets caught. He wakes up strung up, and he can't see what exactly, but some entity engraves on his flesh, carves into his flesh this weird sigil. He then wakes up not on the train, not hanging from his feet, elsewhere, and eventually, it culminates in him wanting to find out what's going on, find out there's a conspiracy that's been going on for years. The police are involved. Bradley Cooper's character's girlfriend, who seems only there ready to die, essentially, gets involved in all this because she's thinking her boyfriend's going mad from it. And I don't really feel that his descent into madness is conveyed very well.
No,
I'm not really. I'm just I just couldn't empathize with this guy whatsoever. And then he realizes his girlfriend is on the train, the murder train. And so obviously he jumps aboard, has a big fight with Vinnie Jones's character, the Butcher, takes him out. Eventually they get to the end stop, which is this weird place, this under New York, where there's tons of bones and everything. And the train driver comes out and says, please get away from the flesh. Spoiler alert. Crazy creatures come in and eat the bodies that have been hung up, that the Butcher has obviously killed these people that night, ready to feed these creatures. So this is happening every night. Vinnie Jones's character then is eventually dead, and as he dies, he goes, "Welcome" to the guy, and he basically reveals that essentially Bradley Cooper's character is going to be the new Butcher, or at least that's what's meant to happen. He's not too happy with the scenario and is quite angry at the train driver, tries to have a go at him, but the train driver, we then discover, lifts Bradley Cooper up by the throat, rips his tongue out, and so you're now left with, is the train driver, was he human, and is he becoming one of these creatures, or is he one of these creatures with a nice, pretty flesh suit?
He's apparently human because he talks about serving them.
Yeah.
So,
and
whatever.
And then to finally convince Bradley Cooper's character that he's going to serve as the new Butcher, the girlfriend, who is lying unconscious on a big pile of gnawed bones, gets stabbed in the chest by the train driver, who then rips out her heart, which continuously beats for quite a long time in his hands, and that's basically the end of it. Oh, and then days later, there's Mr. Bradley Cooper, photographer, who's the new Butcher. You compare this to what we read of the short story, and the short story...
He's not a photographer at all.
No, he's just a down-and-out guy, isn't he?
Yes. The reason, I mean, they try and flesh out the story in a really boring way, I feel, because the reason that he's trying to take pictures of, you know, creepy shit that's going down in the city is because he wants to be like a real photographer and wants to get somewhere and you know, take pictures of things that are shocking, but it's real life, things like that.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any logic to the ending. Like, I don't really know what his motivation is supposed to be for serving the creatures, especially after his girlfriend is killed. Because, let's face it, after you saw that, you would just commit suicide rather than serve the creatures, wouldn't you? You would just kill yourself on the spot. I think the
short story suggests that in that one, the protagonist, because he's down and out, obviously sees serving the creatures as a way of protecting his family, which he's obviously estranged from.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. But in the film version,
the guy's lost everything. Yeah,
left, right, to fight for, to believe in, almost. So yeah, like you said, the narrative doesn't show a descent into madness at all. The photographer background is pointless, doesn't really go anywhere. Because the side characters involved in the photography who seem like they might be important to the plot, but they're not. You know, Brooke Shields is in it for no reason at all, doing nothing. Again, the girlfriend is only there as a catalyst for the ending. Yeah, about the train driver, possibly he seems to be human, and yet he can rip out a man's tongue with one bare hand.
Yeah,
for some reason. And also, I hate Vinnie Jones and I hate Bradley Cooper.
So, there you go.
But I think that the concept is salvageable. It's I'm sure the story is.
So the original
amazing,
short story apparently makes note that the monsters are kind of like the old gods, you know, kind of Greek, Roman old gods, and that, or they're at least humans that serve as butchers and eventually become monsters of their own. And it's very much this, like, you know, making offerings to the old gods to please them, or else they're going to obviously run rampant and destroy Rome. Maybe that's how Rome was destroyed, because Rome's got catacombs. So
you can connect that to Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it feels like they fleshed out all the wrong bits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If they looked at what the monsters were, I think they could have fleshed that out and really made the conspiracy itself the more interesting bit. And they could have then filled the movie more to do with the conspiracy, not how many artistic ways can we have Vinnie Jones butcher people in the next half hour?
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm also going to say that I'm a fan of gore and creative gore. I really am. I just, I thought there was too much CGI, and I was also quite baffled when I looked up the movie after I watched it and saw that it has like 70% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is ridiculous. And the fact that there's so many good reviews of this, and I understand that it's sort of a cult movie, a cult classic now almost, which is crazy. I don't know if you can say classic now when a movie's so new.
It's
but,
it's no Nightbreed. It's no Nightbreed.
but what's funny about it is, like, you know, I don't think it's completely awful, but the fact that it got such a high rating is really strange to me. You know, I don't really know what's there other than the gore. And I saw a critic's review of it, which said, oh yeah, it doesn't really have any substance, but it has so much gore, and that's what the genre fans are looking for. And I blatantly disagree with that. You know, that horror fans are only interested in the gore because it's like, yeah, some movies are good for, like, if you're in the mood to watch gore.
It's a victim of post-Saw based horror films, which is not really horror. Anyway, David,
I love
your
it.
opinions. Okay, there we go. Brilliant.
I went to see it at the cinema. I think it was the day it came out. There were, I think, 4 other people in the room, and had to travel quite a long way to find a cinema that was showing it. I really like it in terms of, I think it's one of my favourite evocations of Clive Barker's style of body horror, and I really like the occult aspects. I like that they don't explain too much with regards to what they are. My understanding, and this might not have been the case, but my understanding was, I think they were hoping to do at least 1 sequel, maybe 2, where they would expand. So that mystery about the City Fathers is something that they were going to go into. I think that that's one of the most interesting aspects, and I think that maybe trying to get multiple films out of a short story is problematic, and maybe just include that conspiracy within it. But I thought Vinnie Jones did a really good job of conveying that character and only saying a single word. I think that he had a certain sense of, in particular, I'm thinking about the kind of physicality when he sat on the tube in an incredibly neat but also hunched up and unassuming way, and the way in which he would shift into the butcher character. So it was. I was kind of the opposite, because I saw at the time it got a lot of 2-star reviews, and I was kind of baffled as to why. So yeah, I mean, I thought the ending was great. I really liked the City Fathers, who I think were the creatures. And with regards to it, it's very much like, you know, he has a sigil carved in his chest. The train driver might have been the equivalent of a ghoul to the City Fathers, whatever they are, and so he might be given powers. Bradley Cooper, I don't get a sense it is a descent into madness. I think it's a becoming controlled and losing free will. I think that was my interpretation. It wasn't that he'd gone mad. It was that he was being drawn into this world, and there wasn't really anything he could do to stop it.
Yeah, I think that was probably the intention, and unfortunately, Bradley Cooper's a terrible actor, so that's probably why.
I don't really find him convincing much.
I thought the cinematography was really good.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. It looks great. Yeah,
I think it just
get rid of the CGI blood.
Like I said, I think it padded out too much in the wrong places. Like I mean, I still think Vinnie Jones would have been fine in that role. I think they should have worked with his physicality more and relied on that with practical effects, not his physicality almost being a bit diminished by the CGI-ness of some of the ways some of the kills were done.
It was, because it felt as though, kind of like removed from what he could actually do, even though he's obviously has.
Because I compare that to like just the physicality of certain scenes in like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, and it just seems night and day in that case. I think they just needed a bit more of the mythology in there, just a little bit more to give it a case of. And just feeling like
I think they could have streamlined the plot with the whole I want to be a big time photographer and the side characters. I think if they'd just kept it a little bit more simple and just cut the fat around the edges, I think it would have been a lot better.
I think
I
that
love go on.
the mythology aspect of it is some of the most interesting elements. And although I really enjoyed the film, I would have liked to see more as well. I think that whatever was going on down there was really intriguing, and I'd like to have seen a little bit more. Without, because I had a very strong sense of Lovecraftian weird horror with the City Fathers, that you weren't supposed to know what they are, but you could still have expanded the conspiracy outside of them, so you could have found out a little bit more as to why this is being allowed to happen.
Which would have been more interesting for the photographer, because as a photographer, you're very, being a photographer and being so caught up in visual media, you would have, by going through kind of the history of the city and so forth, more than likely would have picked up on the visual cues of this ancient conspiracy, not just the what the newspaper report said, but you see this sigil everywhere, you see the patterns, and that's, that in itself is kind of a madness, and that's what I wanted more of a sense of, not the mind, and that can lead into the eventual losing control of yourself and being pliable to the wills of these chthonic entities. But I didn't really get that, and I was disappointed.
I think to a certain extent you could have had. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've watched the film, but when the train driver, I don't think he necessarily explains why they're doing it. If he could have said that, if we don't do this, this is what will happen, could be an additional motivation for Bradley Cooper's character. Yeah. If you're told, if you don't take on this role, everyone's going to be killed, and this is what happened. It's happened before.
Which is why the death of the girlfriend kind of diffused the whole need for it. Sorry, yeah.
That would have made sense because, without them actually saying it, it seems like they're saying, hey, you've got to do this or we'll kill you, in which case you would probably choose, yeah, just kill me then, because that seems like less bother.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they should have been more specific, yeah.
There's definitely a lot you can rescue from it, because it's very much kind of also has elements of feeling like it's a very blood drenched Neverwhere, especially if you go with if you cast the character back to being a down and out person, then it's definitely a blood drenched Neverwhere, and that I can appreciate. I think there's definitely a lot you can use for Chronicles of Darkness. Again, it works for the God Machine because you simply remove the creatures, and the whole idea that the subway system is this occult matrix that is literally a meat grinder feeding the strange alchemical stomach orifice thing that's living at the depths of the city, that is somehow connected to the God Machine. That's kind of cool. I can work with that. The idea that possibly that the creatures are the old gods, the old that they're the primordials, or they're the old titans, and they still have to be placated by their pound of flesh or more. That, I think, just a hint of that mythos, I think, can add to it. And then you've got the idea of a mystery cult, which you can then bring into the story, and then how do other people interact with them? Is there some bargain that they're willing to do to become immortal, but at what cost, to become one of those creatures? I think in the short story, apparently the creatures also work for some larger entity, which is interesting to me. I wonder if it's Baphomet from Nightbreed. That'd be a weird twist. You could mash it up with Nightbreed quite happily, I guess. Because Nightbreed, again, has very... and Neverwhere, I feel quite similar in that respect, being outcasts. I also think the creatures could easily be a very nasty, immortal cadre of Centimani Prometheans.
Yes, absolutely.
And obviously, with all that flesh about, they can easily make more of themselves, or craft them into Pandorans. That'll be fun. And then you can really push the Greek-Roman mythos. Like maybe they're all Centimani of the Galatean, or the shit. What's the other one? Galatean. What's the name of the stone golem? I can't remember his name, but it's from Sumerian mythology. But anyway, you can use Promethean for that.
Yeah.
You could easily use it for vampire. I'm sure you could turn it into some sort of flesh-eating vampire group. Could you do something for changeling? Not so certain. The train could easily be going down to an entrance to an Avernian gate in Geist, and
yes,
the flesh is required to keep the gate locked because you need to keep the door wet, keep it wet, keep it closed, and it could all be some way to. It could easily be. I think it's actually one of the ones that you could use most easily for any of the games. I think, and I think it's mostly worth going back to the original text and reading it.
Absolutely.
So one last film we'll do.
Okay.
We mentioned it briefly earlier, and let's cover The Ring, and The Ring 2, most probably. So we've watched.
Well, are we talking about The Ring or Ringu?
I think
we're talking about The Ring.
We can talk about both because there's not too much difference between them.
Yeah, the thing is that the Ring, the American remake, is like the first and greatest of the J-horror remakes. Honestly.
Yeah. I'd agree with that.
Pretty solid, yeah. And I love Naomi Watts, so.
I think the cinematography in The Ring is incredible, and they had one of the scenes that I thought was really evocative and powerful was with the horse.
Yes,
on the ferry.
That really sticks with me every time. I just remember first seeing it and being really horrified by it. It is a horrifying scene, honestly, because it's not really just that it's an animal death. I'm not really sensitive to that, but the way it's shot is just fantastic and just awful at the same time.
I think one of the themes in The Ring, obviously, you watch this thing, it kind of infects you, and you have only like 7 days to live, and then the only way to get around it is you make a copy of the tape. Do we really need to do spoiler alerts?
I don't really think so. No,
I think that's well and truly entered into popular culture.
Come on, I mean, I feel like there's sometimes on darker days. Like, do we really need to do spoiler alerts for most of these films? Like, if you're playing these bloody games, like, get a life if you haven't watched some of these films already. Anyway,
if we start talking about a film and you haven't seen it and you want to avoid spoilers, skip ahead.
We'll have the list of the films in the show notes anyway, so they can stop. But I think the thing with The Ring is it starts. Obviously the horror starts off. We initially encounter, as the viewers of the film, the horror within an urban environment, and to get to the truth, we're drawn out into this unwelcoming and cold countryside, and first to the camp, the log cabin where the clues lead us to, and then that leads us to an asylum that also is out in the countryside, and then finally to Samara's home and where the well is. And so it's all, it takes you out of your there's that feeling of it's taking you out of your comfort zone, which is the familiarity of the city, which is in some respects has been infected by this tape and drawing you back to its origin.
Something I found really powerful is that in I think, I'm not too sure in the Japanese version, it's been years since I've watched it, but you're actually shown what's on the tape.
Yes.
And so there's a meta element to it that even more so than Candyman, whereby you've then seen the thing that
you watch it, yes.
that triggers it, which is quite immersive. And I think that's maybe something you could use in a World of Darkness game. Like, you know, you could potentially have on your laptop a clip of something that has this occult significance that is supposedly destroys the people who watch it in some way. I think that could be quite good if you could find something that's relevant.
Thought of the connection between it before, but we'll talk about it at another time. But Sinister is kind of like The Ring.
Yeah, I think that's worth getting into at another point because there's a lot of other things you could take from that, you know, with the actual entity that's behind it all. So that
that's loads because in The Ring the entity is a ghost. I think I don't know whether in the Japanese sequels, because there's actually 2 sequels. They brought out one initial sequel to Ringu, and then they retconned it and they brought out a separate, different sequel. So
I will also point out for those who don't know that they are bringing out a third remake movie called Rings. They are coming out with that quite soon.
I think that it's one of the best mythologies in horror cinema. I would also say the American remake is in my top 3 of horror remakes.
Yes.
And I would put it alongside John Carpenter's The Thing and David Cronenberg's The Fly. I think it's just a really, really classy, well-constructed, beautifully pitched in terms of atmosphere, pacing, etc. It's a real achievement.
Yeah, I think it's it's kind of a detriment when people hear remake and they automatically think, oh, it's not as good, it's going to be terrible. You know, I've heard people say really snobbish things about the remake of The Ring, and I'm like, you know, do you really believe that, or you know, are you just saying that because you want to sound cool? Because it's actually an amazing movie.
No, I'd agree. The original's fantastic as well, but I think that they are different. Just like The Thing and The Fly, they are significantly different, and it feels like the remake didn't just attempt to copy and paste. It was reconstructed, so it has a lot of the same plot elements. I think in terms of that, so if you're using this for the game, the well, the imagery of the well, the figure crawling out of it, people being so scared that they die with their jaw dislocated, screaming. For me, the scene where she actually steps out of the TV into the room, it was one of the, and then sort of phases in and out of reality, getting closer and closer. Was one of the most effective. The first time I saw it was incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I remember the first time I actually saw that was on. It wasn't actually when I was watching the movie. It was a few years ago, or several years ago, really, when Channel 4 had their 100 Greatest Scary Moments countdown, and this was in the early 2000s. And I think they had it for the original for Ringu, and they showed that clip of Sadako in the original coming out of the TV set. And I was absolutely enthralled by it and terrified, you know. And I remember after I turned off the TV, I walked back to my room with my back against all the walls because I was so petrified that something would be behind me, and it really stuck with me. And I wouldn't really say it's because of that movie, but I've had sort of sleep paralysis on and off during my life, and it's usually had the same element of a creepy girl with long dark hair in the corner staring at me, which is why I have this sort of very personal horror about The Ring. Although that used to describe me as well, a creepy girl with long dark hair. That's why I cut my hair.
In terms of horror and then J horror, I think it's important to note that I think this film, I think this film makes it maybe a nice approachable way so you can get into the mood of J-horror, because J-horror has its own rules in some respects, and there's some really good ones out there, like, you know, there's The Grudge, there's White. That was a really good one.
White,
we need to talk about that another day.
I'm going to correct you. White is K-horror.
It's K-horror. Okay. But I don't want to say they're all the same there, but as
Asian
culturally,
horror,
they draw from a certain baseline culturally of certain commonalities. And this, of course, gets on to why, very, very sad they didn't make it, is why Silent Hill 2 is the best bloody survival horror computer game you can get, that draws elements of J-horror into a Western setting. And I think that's maybe the best thing, again, that's the best thing that The Ring does, the remake, is it gives a good way of showing how to take J-horror, Asian horror elements and recast them and how to use them in a Western, European, American setting, because you can then do some really funky things.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, now sort of the characteristics of J-horror with, you know, their creatures and their demons and the way that they move, you know, is very, you know, there was kind of a blueprint for that with Sadako and Samara, with the way in The Ring 2, where it's in the well.
Yeah,
and she's climbing out of the well, and she goes after her, like the way that, you know, she crawls in that very like inhuman way is very, very iconic. And it's, you know, so many other, you know, you get a lot of Hollywood movies trying to replicate that now. I think they do sometimes do it successfully. I think it's sometimes seen as a shortcut to, oh god, that's absolutely terrifying. You know what I mean? But sometimes it's very effective, but it is, as I said, really, really iconic.
Do they do something like that in Shutter?
It's similar, yes.
And Shutter's another good J-horror. But
I think it's Korean, I'm not sure.
Is it Korean? But again, that one, the interesting thing there is it's set in whichever Asian country, will be corrected on this.
Oh my god.
But who's the lead character in that? Who's the lead actor, sorry?
In the remake, Joshua Jackson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From Dawson's Creek. And other horror films as well. And things. But I think that's the take home from The Ring, is that you can recast these horror tropes in a familiar world, which is a familiar place, which is not Japan, not Tokyo, or not Korea, and you can still have a lot of fun with it, and it will add a lot of, again, that unnerving kind of unknowable kind of horror.
Yeah, I was mistaken as well. It's a Thai horror movie.
Oh, it's Thai. Okay.
I'm very, very sorry if I offended anyone.
Yeah.
Another really good example is A Tale of Two Sisters. It's a Korean film.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen that. I thought it was super.
There's actually a remake of that I hear is awful. So, yeah, my friend told me about it the other day, and now I'm keen to watch it for some reason.
I would very strongly recommend it. Do you know what? I actually think there's the scope for maybe a retrospective in terms of Southeast Asian horror and its lasting effects on Chronicles of Darkness and horror role playing, because there are like the girl with the long dark hair draped over her face has become a stock image of horror that's drawn upon in lots of different places. So I think the scope potentially, I think I probably have to rewatch a lot of these films, but
I'm also going to make a really good point here, and I think they're important to look at both A, as inspiration for your own game, B, as inspiration if you're going to set a game in one of those countries, because obviously those ghosts are attached to certain cultural folklore and mythology and religion and traditions. And when you do that, I think again you've got to be careful how you do it, because the route you don't want to go down is you don't want to go down the cultural exoticism that Kindred of the East did for classic World of Darkness. That basically turned vampires into anime horror, and you don't want to do that. Chronicles of Darkness is not Goku and horror. I'm sorry. That would be crap to do.
Yeah,
I think we've covered a lot. So, you got any last points there?
There is actually a role-playing game produced by Cubicle 7 called Kuro, which is pretty much an attempt to create a setting and a system that's built around some of those ideas with regards to horror. So maybe if we did an episode on that, we could have a look at Kuro.
I could. I think sometime once we've covered all the main games and we want to delve into Southeast Asian horror, I'll grab a PDF of that beforehand and we can get acquainted with that and watch a whole host of films and watch White again and other things. Does that mean I have to play on? Does that mean I have to get Silent Hill 2 again on my Xbox? I had it on the Xbox. I don't have it on my 360, and it scares the crap out of me.
Actually, they're trying to revive Silent Hills.
Oh, joy! Joy! Don't play Silent Hill 3. That sucks. Silent Hill 4, I don't know too much about. Silent Hill 1's all right. Silent Hill films? Visually nice.
Visually in some parts.
Bit of a railroad.
The end, the church is really
that's
insane.
That's a discussion for another day when we can bitch about how those films are blight and a pox upon the games. I think we're ready to wrap up there because we've covered all our topic points for this show. I think next show we're gonna have to do it. We're gonna have to do Vampire the Requiem. It's time for second edition. It's time for the Strips Chronicle, or as it was during Dev, it was wonderfully known as Sex Murder. The book was its code name was Sex Murder.
Wow.
Of course, most probably in the Kirlian Camera, we're going to be talking about all the different vampire films we've ever watched and more. We'll have to pick out a short list and then bitch about the rest.
I was going to say that could last for several hours.
Yeah, so we'll have to pick out some highlights, and then we'll have to pick out briefly some lowlights. Oh, I say lowlights, some lowlights. We'll pick out the crappier ones and say how we can rescue anything from them. And I think that's a good enough outline for that show. How we can be contacted. So, because I'm going to put this through. It'll be on the Darker Days Facebook. So the best way to get in contact is mostly Darker Days Radio Facebook group, our Google Plus community, darkerdaysradio@gmail.com is the best place to send us some Network Zero fan mail. We do get fan mail for Darker Days, and you never know, we might be able to fund a competition at some point again. That'll be good. We have a Twitter, which is Darker Days Radio. You have a Twitter, David, for Twisted Tales.
Yes, Twisted Tales, for those who aren't aware, is a series of horror readings in the UK, and there's an associated blog where I've interviewed and got academics and fans to write reviews of the best 21st century horror, and that's at Morbid Jack and Ori, all one word, on Twitter.
There's the Darker Days blog. That's just Toy Soldiers, so you should post some Toy Soldiers there. So I'll make sure you're now a contributor on there because you've got Toy Soldier crap.
I'll have to paint
just for that. And also, that's where we'll put the write-ups of our Geist Chronicle when that gets started, hopefully in a month's time. Sam?
I am on Twitter and Instagram at Sam Capral, so that's SAMKAPRAL.
Yeah. Let's think. Is there anything else? No. That is all. So this is finally episode 1 of Network Zero, and thank you for listening, you suckers. Night, night.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, the ring. Oh yeah, I think that's the one.
Yeah,
Let's finish on the ring.
Yeah.
Shit. That kind of
Since we
ties
watched
it.
both of them,
Yeah,
it
and that
makes
kind of
sense
ties
today.
in with what we were saying with which one. It follows. But does it?
What?
It follows. But does
I
it
love-
really follow?
I love that.
But yes, it really does follow. But does it really follow? We'll have to do Mighty Boosh inspirations for World of Darkness. Because come on, the Tundra episode is a World of Darkness. It's the mount. Is at the Mountains of Madness. Boosh is just Cthulhu mythos on crack. To the crack fox.
I hate the crack fox.
or the Cockney, or
Of a Barocca.
or Beat Matt's Bandit. He's a perfect antagonist. Milky Joe. There we go. He's a son of a bitch.
I think you could totally do this as like a one-off show. The horror of Mighty Boosh.
Horror of Mighty Boosh. I think that's our Halloween episode. That'd be amusing. Spirit of Jazz.
I think you could actually do how you could insert horror elements into British TV. Like, I mean, you have things like Legal Gentlemen, but then you could do like Black Books, because you know people like Shaun of the Dead and things, don't they? Like, I'm sure you could make a show.
We need to talk about that film, won't we? Or one of them that mostly fits into Eldritch horror. Right at the end is the Stone Tape.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I really didn't get it. I really didn't. We talk about Ghostwatch.
Ghostwatch. Well, yeah, we'll have to talk about Ghostwatch when we
Ghostwatch.
do an episode about ghosts.
Hey, I'm back.
All right, yeah, we know
Hi.
about it. So there's no way to pause these recordings; they just keep going on. So it's just going to have to cut it out. That's all.
Brilliant.
It's post credits entertainment. Some of it. Right, hold on. Get composure. Sorry, my screensaver in my head.